Welcome to Musicians versus the World, the podcast where we explore aspects of music and musician life that may not have been covered in music school. I am your host, Christine Smith. And today we are exploring the world of music editing, the invisible art form that is a success only if you don't notice it. We are lucky to have the award-winning music editor Yuri Gorbachow here to talk with us about this topic. Yuri Gorbachow is the founder of Aesthetic Corporation, a sound and music production company with a rich history in the audio for video industry. With a career spanning over 35 years, he has been working behind the scenes, ensuring that the music in some of the most iconic television productions reaches its highest possible standards. Recognized for his outstanding work, Yuri has been nominated for 25 M.P.S.E Golden Reel Awards and has won 4 times for Best Sound and Music Editing. He has received 11 Canadian Screen Award nominations, winning 9 times. Additionally, Yuri's contributions earned him 2 Primetime Emmy Award nominations for Outstanding Sound Editing for a Series, and he is especially acclaimed as a trustworthy ally and collaborator on prestige projects such as Vikings and Hulu's The Handmaid's Tale. So Yuri Gorbachow, thank you so much for being here, and welcome to Musicians versus the World.
Great. Thank you for having me on the show. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm so excited to chat with you. You are our first music editor on our program, and I'm so excited to just kind of dive into this and learn what it is that you do. So thank you so much for being here. What does a music editor do?
Well, short answer is we take all the music, deliver it in sync to the re-recording stage for the mix.
And so
that's the short answer.
That's the short answer. So there's a long answer too. What's the long answer?
Yeah. So the way I've often described is music editing has a front end and a back end. And the front end includes things like temp music, spotting notes, receiving the composer's first pass score. It's often their demos. I send those up for distribution. They need to be approved. Notes have to come back. They go back to the composer. And then the composer goes to record, whether they're going to record live instruments or not. So that kind of takes us to the middle. And then the back end is receiving the final score, mixing it with all the other music, because there's source music as well, songs that we license, putting those together, getting into the stage. Then we would get the elements mixed. Then there's notes. There's always changes. So facilitating those changes, that's where my job really becomes more prominent. We get those changes done. The show gets locked down. Then there's versions, short version, long version with commercials, airline version, the long version with, with the naughty bits, and the profane version, the less profane version, right? So there's quite a few versions, and then there's the administrative task of cue sheets and deliverables.
Wow, that's a lot. So now, who do you answer to?
I'm hired primarily by the production company,
Okay.
not by the composer. And I would be under the watchful eyes and ears of the post-production supervisor.
Okay.
And then, of course, there's a showrunner that is basically has the collection of all the visions, the story aspects that need to be told, and they're kind of broadcasting to us, the team, the dialogue editors, sound effects. We all have our own little different spotting sessions.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm part of that. The direction is going straight to the composer, right? It's their music, and they're the ones writing it. But I'm a keeper of that information. I'll put fairly good notes together. I'll deliver those to the composer. So they've got their own notes plus what I heard in the room. Little things like, I want it to feel like, I'm camping in the woods or something, and it's like, okay, camping in the woods. Like, what does that mean? We'll worry about that later. But, like little things like that. I'm basically working with the post-production supervisor just to make sure things are on track for schedule and timing and that. But really, I'm kind of paired with the composer, and we work together as a team, and we walk our way through, and I get them to the re-recording stage, and then kind of represent their best interests while I'm there.
Really? Okay. So when you're talking about the spotting session, that's when you sit down and you look at the cut of the film or the show, and you talk with the director or the supervisor, and you say, in this scene, we want it to feel like we're camping, right? And then, so at that point, do you kind of collaborate with the composer, or are you kind of just a resource and they send things to you and you give them notes, or you kind of a go-between? How does that work?
In a music spot, besides the story textures that are discussed, we also talk about where the cue starts, where it ends. So the cueing, any types of shifts that have to happen, the emotions in each shift. A cue could have three different emotions in it as we sort of run the arc through the scene. So yeah, there's a lot of notes that are taken. So that really, I just want to make sure that I'm in the same room and listening to the same conversation, right? But all of these notes are up to the composer to decide how they want to approach it. So I leave the composer alone, let them do their thing, but they'll deliver me their first pass, and it becomes my job to uh, work that in with the dialogue. I do a little mix.
Mhm.
I've always been felt is very important to do that mix, and it goes off to all the people who hear the music who will comment on it. And I've often believed that the better I do that mix, the less notes come back. And so the composer's often very excited about, like, sell that cue. Don't, like, make sure it's presented in its best light. So it sounds like a finished product, right?
Yeah.
If the cue is a little clunky, if it's too loud, if it clobbers a line of dialogue, there may be a comment that says there's something wrong with that cue, please rewrite it, right?
Hmm.
Whereas if I make sure that the cue is mixed beautifully, the dialogues are all crisp from what I have available to me, let the music do what it needs to do, and then it sort of gracefully comes to an end. The cue is just one less. I guess it's looked upon favorably, right? And then
Hmm.
and then the comments can be more real as to the actual instrumentation and the arrangement and if it's working. So those notes go back to the composer. And again, I sit back. I'm waiting, right?
Hmm.
Basically for the score to be delivered. And then once it gets delivered, um, that's when I would represent them on the stage. Many times the composer can't, like, I'm based in Toronto, right? So physically they can't be here. But if I'm on the stage with them and there's changes that are being requested, um, before we let them know that there's a change that's so significant that they might have to take another look at it,
Hmm.
there's so much that I can do. I can extend a cue, shorten it, I can make things change, shift it down a little bit. Basically, really work with the showrunner to
Hmm.
have them, so that the cue just sort of drops in as nicely as it can. And if it's accepted, then no more needs to be said. So I try to prevent sending music fixes back to the composer if I can help it.
Yeah. And you have experience as a composer and a re-recording mixer as well. And I can see, like, just in your face how you have a fun time doing those little adjustments and things.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I mean, I look at it this way. Let's use the Rubik's cube as an example. When that little puzzle came out, right?
Uh,
Some people were throwing these things against the wall; they were so frustrated, right? But others were fascinated and became obsessed with the Rubik's cube. And I could, yeah, I could say that the puzzle needs to be finished, and you obsess, you persist until it is correct, whatever that may be, until everybody sort of breathes a sigh of relief and says, "That's really beautiful piece of music," and it's done, right? So
oh,
I love
yeah.
the puzzle for sure.
Yeah. So now you had mentioned something about how you can extend a cue a little bit here. Um, Now, when you're on that stage, when you're doing that, how do you do that? Do you do that like right there in that session, or is that something you take home and you try to extend it in your own studio? How does that work?
Right, great question. So I do bring a rig with me,
Okay.
and let me rephrase that. I used to bring a rig with me, and COVID changed a little bit of that. We still had shows. I mean, obviously, when that awful thing hit, it kind of stopped things for a bit. But once we started rolling again, we were starting to practice distancing, and that mixed with some new technology, sort of Zoom Plus, as it were,
Hmm.
where I could actually stay in my studio where I'm at right now. And I've got my main rig. I got three 27-inch monitors across here. This is where I'm most comfortable editing. So rather than taking my little laptop and trying to do fixes on the stage,
Yeah.
which is something that I used to do, to be able to then deliver those fixes right there. I don't really need to be just outside the studio or in the back part of the room with headphones. I can stay at home now, and I've got high speed internet and just deliver it to the stage, and it's as if I was there. So
Wow.
that seems to be the more common approach now. Um, is that I can be at the stage for the playback, And if there's going to be fixes, I hop in the car and I go home right away, and then I do part two because it's a lot easier.
Yeah.
I have more resources available to me, so it's much more efficient now. And that's kind of the very little variation in workflow that's happened over the last couple of years now.
Okay. That's pretty amazing. I love that. I love it that they say, oh, there's a problem. You're like, okay, I got to go home.
Gotta go. Yeah.
So now you've won multiple awards for your music editing and your sound editing. But what makes something a good sound, or not sound? What makes something a good music edit?
Okay, really, really good question. Award season is an interesting time, obviously, and we all submit and we hope for the best. With the M.P.S.Es, it really comes down to its peer recognition. With music editing, because the score itself is written by the composer, how does one judge music editing?
Right.
And we are expected to submit quite a few reports, quite a few supporting documentation for our submission. And often that includes discussing how many picture changes there were, or what elements of editing, like show us. We'll take a picture of we'll do a screenshot of our Pro Tools session, and you can just see all the little cuts, and we'll explain why we made those cuts there. So on a cue by cue basis, it's a fairly lengthy submission. We don't just ask for a tape and send it in and have it screened, because our peers, who would be music editors that have to look at this, they get it. They understand. It's like, well, what did you do? And we have to explain what it is that we do.
Right, because if you do a good job, no one notices the edit.
Exactly it.
Yeah.
Right. Our what was I going to say? I remember. Yeah, because our work is invisible.
Yeah.
It's not supposed to be noticed by the viewing audience. Then how do you tell? Well, those on the team would understand when picture starts getting cut, when things are being asked to be moved around. The music is not invisible. It's clunky. There's things that are just sort of sitting there. They're not gelled. Even moving something 3 frames later, just ever so later, just drops everything in properly. There's a I guess, like in comedy, right? A good joke has timing. And so the dialogue editor, the dialogue, sound effects, and music, it could be like, pulls a gun out and goes, hey, stick them up, right? So you got dialogue, you got the music that goes ta-da, and it just can't be too soon and too late. It gets very, very subtle. And so when you go through that process and everything is right, and everyone in the room, dialogue's there, sound effects, the mixers, the number of clients, and we all know that's feeling much better. And then we just let that go. And so then when the average viewer, or when a sophisticated viewer, watches the show, it's just a beautiful package. The presentation is just there, and there's you just enjoy it, right?
Is that why you call it an underrated art form? Because it's invisible?
It's invisible, yeah. It is. I mean, art form, by definition, I think there's an art form, or there's a creativity, for sure. We haven't spoken about temp music, and maybe that's my segue to go into that.
Sure.
But temp music is very much an art form. There's a controversy associated with temp music. I've been in the center of that for most of my life. I'm the music editor. I'm the guy that's putting the stuff in that the producer falls in love with, that then tells the composer to copy that, right? And then everybody gets upset. But honestly, that's been dealt with decades ago, right? Temp love is a real thing. The music that is used in early editing. Remember, I'm hired often before the composer's even hired. I'm brought on board. We're thinking about, we're going to lock soon. We're going to have to hire a composer soon, but we need to have some music put in. The picture editor may request a music editor. Up until then, they don't need one, right? But all of a sudden, the picture editor has a deadline. Picture editing is also, bring a picture editor onto your show, and then they'll be able to tell you that images have their own rhythm as well.
Right.
And picture editors might want to cut without music, let those visual rhythms establish themselves, and then bring in a piece of music to support that. I don't think a picture editor wants to bring in a piece of music and then cut to it. It's not as simple as a video. So if the picture editor, they're laying in temporary music. They're kind of having some fun, but at a certain point, they may need to hand it off to a music editor. Um, there's sometimes temp screenings to financiers, to test audiences. I'm kind of going into feature films a little bit here. I'm kind of going into all the projects I've worked on.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'm brought in to cut temp. Um, we play it for a test audience. It goes over very well, and then notes come back, and then things are starting to cook. Who are we going to hire? Maybe Yuri, you can do temp music from the composers being considered. So I go to their movies and their projects and start throwing some music in. And all of this is happening in advance. And so where's the art form? Well, the art form is um, cutting alternates. I'm not going to just put one piece of music in. I'll put in 2, 3, up to 5 pieces of music. So we can be conventional. Here's a scene, I don't know, some action, a little car chase or whatever. Let's go conventional. So I'll go find some music that's conventional from other sources, even from very big name composers and big name movies. Just go to the video store and load up on the music. Sorry, the CD store, or go to wherever we get our music nowadays. But I used to buy all the soundtracks, right?
Right.
And digitize them into my system and lay them up. So we can go conventional. We can kind of go over the top. We can maybe play it funny. We can go subtle. We can go counterpoint. We can find a song and put a rock and roll song in there. And all of it it's the same picture, right? And the reactions are much different. So we kind of let those percolate and let um, let the music, all these options play for everyone. And then comments start to come back.
Mm-hmm.
No, we don't like that at all, right? Okay, good. That helps, right? It's very helpful. And then some are wonderful, right? So I think, using temporary music as a role model is a very important thing, right? You want to decorate your house. You and your partner deciding, let's get a blue sofa, and then you flip through all the catalog and you find a blue sofa. And what about this, right? And then ultimately, that's not the sofa you're going to get. Ultimately, you may commission a custom sofa to be built for you, but at least you have the 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 language to speak about color and image and shape, and you can communicate that to somebody else. So the role of temp music is very important, and at some point, and this is the reality, is that legally it has to be discarded. So what do we keep from that? And that is all those conversations. I've been keeping notes on everything that was said, from I hate that to I love that, and everything in between. And so some of this has to be communicated to the composer so that when they come on board, they're not forced to copy the temp.
Right.
They can get all the language leading up to that, and then they can go, that's very interesting. Let me walk away with that, and I'll come back and I will continue from where the temp left off, rather than being forced to copy the temp.
Gotcha.
And when you continue where the temp left off, you can help deliver the emotion that's required. So that's the artful part, I think, of music editing, is the temporary music and managing all of those different alternates.
Mm-hmm.
And then once that's learned, then the composer is so much further ahead in what it is that they need to do, and then they're not burdened with what should I write?
Right. Or thinking that they know what they're doing and then having to rewrite everything because they just don't have all the information that they're needing.
Yeah, information is important. What was said in the room? How is it described? Whenever the topic of temp love comes up, I use the example of temp hate, right? Um, we'll be at a music spotting session, and of course, all that temp music is embedded, right? So it's being played as we're going through it, and the comment will come in. We'll come to the end of the scene. We'll pause, and we'll go, you know what? We don't like that temp. Why? Well, the temp is not addressing the storyline, or it's playing to this character. It should be playing to that character. Oh, interesting. And these notes are being taken down. So in a way, it's whether the cue is loved or hated. It doesn't matter. It's the discussion that's the most important. And we're all present as a team. We're all present to ultimately be on the same page. And then the composer, I think, has so much more to work with when they walk away and find themselves alone in front of their system. And what are they going to write? Hopefully, they now have a little bit more of a kick to move them forward.
That is so interesting. And does the same thing happen in a show? I know you've worked on Vikings, which is coming out in 2024, the next season of that. Is that a similar process when you're doing episodic sort of things?
Yeah, episodic is a little different, and Vikings also had various phases, right? Vikings has been around since 2013. It's just
Hmm.
been such a great run, and I'm grateful. Believe me, I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to work on a show that runs 9 seasons and then has a spin-off called Vikings Valhalla,
Hmm.
which is now seasons 1 and 2 aired already. So season 3 is coming out in
Right.
Q1 of 2024. Um, it's gone through various incarnations. Earlier on, I was doing some temp. A lot of the temp music, because the show was just looking for its voice, it
Hmm.
was looking for its sound, and so these role models were being pitched. And but at a certain point, the show stabilized. The picture editors were able to develop their own shorthand with temporary music. Then the composer Trevor Morris has been delivering the first season, for example. So now we have a library, which I manage with a database, and the library is available to the picture editors to lay up bits of music to create temp, and they can finish the episode on their own, or they can request some help if they're having a little bit of difficulty with a particular place. They'll throw me a scene that's just in an early cutting stage,
Hmm.
and then I can find them some music. Or they might ask me, "Can you send me 5 pieces of music that represent this character? We need a certain level of fear, or we need a level of, some of the more sophisticated emotions of wonder and intrigue and suspense. It's not all da da da, right? We don't want to go over the top or play it under. So I'm hunting through the library and I just fire them off some ideas and they lay it up, and so that it becomes sort of a little bit self perpetuating. In some episodes, I have very little to do, right? And and every once in a while, an episode comes along where um, we basically track it. So there's there is a couple of episodes in Vikings where Trevor didn't write anything, and it was all tracked from library,
Hmm.
and so that's a good episode to submit for awards consideration because I would have cut all the music and 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 molded it and adjusted it, presented it. It was all mixed, and then it can kind of go in. So that's a satisfying feeling to get a tracked episode every once a season.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's when your real creativity, like you have just like kind of free reign with that creativity.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Otherwise it's a support role,
Uh-huh.
and um, um, i- the the I was going to say the show almost dictates to you, right? The scene plays itself out, and with guidance from production, um, we know what we need to do, right? And then the guidance continues as we work our way through to the mix.
Hmm. So you get to do all of this, and then you mentioned there's the cue sheet afterwards as well,
Mhm.
and that's a whole other story. Do you want to explain a little bit what your role is in this cue sheet and what it does?
Right. So, I mean, legally, and for the benefit of the composer and benefit for the distribution of the show, we need to know how much music is in it. So the cue sheet is the final administrative task of finding out, uh, breaking each piece of music down in various different clips, each cue, and then who's the owner of the cue, the publishing, the length of time, the type of music. Is it a visual vocal? Is it a background instrumental? Is it theme? And basically finalize that. And each version gets its own. We
Hmm.
haven't spoken about versions, but
Right.
we start chopping up the show, and there's 5 different versions that are going all around the world, like 5 major versions, and then there's subversions to that. But yeah, so obviously being able to keep a database
Hmm.
and track the the details,
Hmm.
and then yeah, that's part of the deliverables. And then of course there's the actual music that was used for the show, the stereo mixes. They all kind of go into a library as well. So I'm managing my own library, but I'm also managing the deliverables for the production. So Netflix, for example, with Vikings Valhalla, has very specific requirements
Hmm.
for their deliveries, and so I want to be able to help with that.
So we can talk about these different versions. Why do you need so many different versions?
I think I touched on that earlier.
Hmm.
Some networks, before 9 o'clock, it has to be squeaky clean.
Yeah.
After 9 o'clock, it can be a little naughtier. And
Hmm.
then there might be a Showtime version, a cable version, and it can be, its original raucous, wonderful, dramatic self, right? So there's that. Certain networks will allow the show to be longer, right?
Hmm.
I'll go into Showtime networks, for example, The Tudors, which ran for 4 seasons, quite a ways ago, quite a long time ago now. But The Tudors, on Showtime it was 55 minutes, but when it played on network television with commercial breaks, it's 44:30.
Hmm.
So what happened to the 13 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Right? It gets cut out, and then the show needs to still have story. So the picture editors, the production is guiding the story as it's being told, but the the cut down from 57 minutes. What do we do with those cues, right? With dialogue and sound effects, you cut a scene out and you just take away those elements, but the music tends to kind of just drip over into the next scene. So the music is lopped right off, and so now we have to put an ending on it. How do we end that cue? And so for versioning, I usually get some additional time to be delivered the new version. I've got the stems from the final mix,
Hmm.
and then I put it together. Now, whether I can cut it together and then, well, usually send it back to the re-recording mixers who then have to blend it back in. But that's a fair amount of time
Yeah. It
uh,
seems like it.
to spend afterwards.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. How much time do you usually get to do that?
Um, so it's hard to add up. I mean, is it a 40-hour week? Like it's here and there, right? Bits and
Okay.
pieces. I'll open up. I'll be working on multiple episodes at the same time. So as we're wrapping up an episode and delivering it, we're also doing the music spot for something 4 episodes down, and then everything in the middle.
Hmm.
Um, it's funny if I'm asked, can you predict how many hours it's going to take you to cut it? It depends on the complexity of that episode.
Hmm.
So hopefully over the arc of the season, there's some harder episodes and some easier episodes, and the whole thing works out. I mean, I'm just monitoring, uh, my work life in terms of, am I getting enough sleep, right?
Right.
And if that's okay, that's fine. But the workload, as anyone in media arts will tell you, it can get pretty crazy
Hmm.
with deliveries that loom very quickly, and suddenly you find yourself doing a late night that you weren't expecting, and that's part of the gig. We all know about that. So really, it's about managing that,
Hmm.
and I have a couple of mechanisms to be able to make sure I get the sleep, because that's
Yeah.
that's what gives you the energy to carry on, right?
Right.
So you just have to pick and choose and maybe take little naps here and there, that kind of thing.
I would think so. So do
I'm just
you
thinking of this after lunch thing. I decided to sleep for an hour and a half. It was the best thing I could have done, because then, you just felt good to go. Yeah. Mm.
Exactly. Do you have a typical day, or does it just depend on what project you're working on?
There is no typical day. Often I'm working on multiple series.
Hmm.
Um, I could be on a Handmaids and Vikings Valhalla and uh, uh, Accused, which is a courtroom procedural, and they're all kind of being turned on and off, as I need to facilitate things. So the only time I worry about overlaps is meetings,
Okay.
right? If I'm on my own working, I'm free to work on something, and I usually have some time. I don't have deadlines looming within hours and minutes. If an instruction comes out, then I'll address it as quickly as I can. So the only thing I tend to worry about is, do I have to be at a studio while being at a spotting session for another episode or another show?
Hmm.
That that could be a bit dicey.
Well, because you don't make those schedules, right? Like that's because there's so many people that need to be at those different sessions.
Correct.
How do you, if things do overlap, how do you usually manage that?
Um, well, that's where an amazing post-production supervisor and their coordinating team comes in, because they are constantly scheduling and they're constantly adjusting the schedules.
Hmm.
All kinds of things can happen. An instruction can come in. We have to delay something. I don't find things get pulled up, but um, I'm emailed with a request. Are you available? Right, and
Mm.
then I can quickly let them know I've got a bit of a conflict there, or I can make myself available. Depends on if it's really necessary. So that is of course, in post production, scheduling is critical, and you need really good people to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful that someone can check in with me, and then I can I can pick a time that I am available, and then I lock it down, and then we just manage that as best we can. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. I just wonder, because you've been doing this for over 35 years,
Yeah.
how did you get into this? I'm sure the industry has changed so much, and I would love to see how it's changed. But first, how did you get into it in the first place?
Well, I trained as a recording engineer, record producer. I went to the Music Industry Arts program at Fanshawe College in London, Ontario, back in 1982. It was one of the few schools uh, in existence for that kind of thing, commercial music. Of course, now there's many more schools
Hmm.
all throughout the U.S. and Canada. I graduated from that program and landed at a recording studio that interestingly was kind of going through an economical tough time, and they survived by going into film and television production. Basically, the argument was bringing record making technology, right, which is 2-inch open reel tape, using, with some new technology of synchronization and replacing the sprocketed film that was being used in film in those days. So I landed in a studio. Unbeknownst to me, I thought I was going to be doing rock and roll bands, and found myself working on TV shows. And as an engineer, uh, dialogue, spoken voice, vocals, right, sound effects, noises, percussion, drums. When you think about it, they kind of all are mixed up. And then the music is the music. And I happen to be a musician. I'm a drummer. I think that's helpful to
Hmm.
be able to, right? But I don't think you have to be a drummer. I think anybody who taps on when people are tapping on the desk and the other
Yeah.
people are telling them to stop it, all the people tapping, they would make good music editors. Okay, you know what I'm saying? I don't think you need to be a musician per se. I'm having fun of it, but I love tapping on people who are always telling me to stop, and that's fine. Um, but that's the act, right? You're tapping to the beat, and you're
Yeah.
going to make an edit there, and you're going to make another edit, and you're going to put the two together. So
Hmm.
I think recording engineering and my education was very helpful, and you could port the music industry into audio post, and that was kind of the official learning. But then unofficially, you're working in the studio. We're adapting the technology. We're keeping everything in sync. That's the critical part is the repeatability. You have to be able to go back and then play it over again and make sure everything is identical except for the things that you change. Um, but my time at the facility, I remember as far as a personal anecdote was the after a number of years assisting, the general manager came to me and was asking me like, what is it that you want to do? Do you want to be a Foley recordist, or do you want to be a mixer, or do you want to? And I was just like, I want it all. Bring it on. I want it all. And they didn't really know what to do with that because it was a very exciting time to work on dialogue and shoot some ADR, spend some time with an actor, and then go over and Foley and pound away with a phone book in some mud, and then run over, do some music editing, and then mix it all together. I just kept saying, listen, I want it all. And interestingly, the general manager was like, we're a very, very busy post house. And I'm always having scheduling, whether people are ill, or they leave, they move on. And so to have a floater was really handy. So he granted me my wish, and I was able to just do everything in audio post, which served me really well when I finally went freelance and decided what is it that I want to do. And so when it comes to music editing, to know that I have to hand my work off to a re-recording mixer is really great, because I did that role for a long time in a high capacity. So I don't do that anymore, but I know where they're coming from, so I can meet their expectations. And the same thing with working with a composer. I was, in the late '80s, early '90s, there was a lot of library. The TV series would have composers just write massive amounts of library, and then they would just cut into
Mm.
the show. And so the music editor was much more of an engineer, following the guidance of the composer. It's the composer's vision, right?
Hmm.
But they never wrote to score the episode. They wrote library, and then they would grab the little bits and pieces. So it was a lot of fun to work with that. And certainly my early mentors who really helped to educate me on what I needed to do were composers who were showing me how to bridge and how to musically, bridge things together. So I think ultimately, I loved having that wonderful holistic exposure to the entire post process.
Hmm.
And when the golden age of television really matured, early 2000s, um, there it became a full-time job to be a music editor. And then I dropped in with a really great production company, a number of them, um, and then started working on more high-end network television series. And it was just like there's no time to be, soup to nuts. You can't just be the one engineer that does the entire audio post.
Yeah.
You've got to be part of a team, and that became more the reality over the last 20 odd years, is working mostly as a music editor, but understanding what everyone else is doing on the team. So
Right. Yeah, that
that's
makes you a better collaborator when you understand what they're
absolutely,
when they're doing.
absolutely.
Wow, that's so interesting. So you've seen a lot of changes. Where do you see music editing going in the future?
Um, well, I hope it survives AI. That ultimately is the question.
We all hope everything survives AI.
Yeah, yeah. I can imagine if you just put a couple of links in and hit a button and everything just gets lined up.
I know.
The future of music editing, it's hard to predict. I know that it's a very necessary task. Um, Media composers, screen composers, often are taking on the roles that are traditionally belong to a music editor, right?
Oh.
And um, there's some benefits to that, but there's also detriment to that. If a composer has to, for example, start laying out their stems, right? That's something that I would do. I'm liaising with the re-recording mixer, and the re-recording mixer is telling me this is how I like to receive things, and then I go to the composer and they go, this is how I like to print things, and then I'll try to broker the differences and put it together. So it's something that I do in the background on my own, and I just absolve the composer from all those tasks.
Mm.
So production that hires me to look after it really gives more time for the composer to write, and they don't have to worry about all these tasks.
Hmm.
Um, and in a way, I hope I can continue to do that, because I'm not a composer in waiting. I've never been wanting to compose music, interestingly enough, because I'm too obsessed with the Rubik's Cube of puzzle solving, which is what happens when the music gets all chopped up, right?
Uh-huh.
So I think in the future, I think that music editing will continue. Um, uh, some of the skills, like some of the tools that are coming out with Pro Tools, are quite amazing. Pitch shifting, for
Hmm.
example, time compression has really
Yeah.
matured, and it used to be very noisy. It used to be at a certain point, you got a certain amount of time compression that you could do, and then you could hear your audio crumble.
Hmm.
And as an audio engineer, you'd have to say, I can't do that. So you have to go back to other methods. But now that time compression is much better, it can go a little bit. It can, a little bit more advanced. So I think technology is nipping at my heels a little bit, and scaring me away, or like I don't know. It's hard to say, but um, ultimately, there's a schedule, and then there's the story that needs to be told,
Yeah.
and the teams are put together that way. So um, we'll see. I think, yeah, good post production supervisors also crew up, so
Hmm.
they're the ones that understand, um, you know, what the budget is for a music editor and how much
Right.
they would need one. So I'm optimistic that the future looks good.
Oh, good. I love it. I love what you do. And the more we are talking, the more like, wow, that sounds like a really, really amazing way to make a living. And you teach, so you see a lot of up and coming music editors that are wanting to do what you're doing. What sort of advice do you have for aspiring musicians or aspiring music editors?
Well, for sure, there's tenacity, right?
Uh-huh.
There's curiosity. If you're not curious or tenacious, you might want to find something else, right? Like ultimately, what people want to do. If you're an aspiring musician, you go, what can I do with my musical skills? Well, let's see what's out there, right? And you can piggyback onto a number of different things. And if, for example, music editorial is one of them, then you ask yourself, are you curious enough to want to pursue multiple avenues? Because we don't just put one piece of music to one scene and then like it or not. We do it 5 times and then we see how they're interacting, right? So there's a journey there. Um, but there's a few other things. For example, would say never throw anything out, right? Which means that when you make a cut, you might judge it as, oh, I don't like that. I'm going to just get rid of it. It's like, no, 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 don't do that. Finish it off and park it as like a least favorite alt and go work on another alternate. So I'm always working on alternates. There's the scene. I'm going to cut it 3 or 4 different ways. whether it's temp or whether I'm cutting from library, or I'm assisting the composer with just giving them ideas. You have to be able to finish it off, because that if you judge your own work and you get rid of something because you don't like it, something might happen a day or two down the road, a little shift in perspective, and next thing you know, that least favorite alt becomes the leading contender, and you're just like, what did I threw it out. Oh no, right? So it's so yeah, you need a little bit of hoarding instinct. I don't know if I could go there. You know, a little bit of Don't I mean, digital doesn't take up a lot of space, right?
Right.
So I think that's a big part of it. But pursue your passions, I suppose.
Yeah.
Music editors kind of evolve out of, let's say, musicianship versus you find yourself in a post house, you might be cutting some sound effects or dialogue. The need comes up. I know a lot of music editors that are past sound effects editors. Wait a second, I'm a past sound effects editor too. But I think you slide into that position if you're in a post audio house and you're kind of exposed to it.
Mm-hmm.
So keep your eyes open, ears open, and look around and see what's coming up. And if the opportunity presents itself, then obviously give it a chance, because it's a great gig.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yuri, you are amazing. Thank you so much for talking with me and explaining this whole aspect and this whole career in music that I did not know very much about. I so appreciate you. It's been such a joy chatting with you.
Oh, likewise. A pleasure.